Hey y'all, happy Wednesday. Hope y'all have had a good week so far. So today we are going into what will be probably the beginning of the last big thing we talk about this year, and that is colonial history of Southeast Asia and a little bit of Africa too. And so we are going to look at what colonies are and how Southeast Asia has gotten wrapped into all of this. Um, we will take notes of these today. If you want to use the notes that I have created for you, they are on the first page of the module. Um, you don't have to use them. You'd rather just take your own notes. That is perfectly fine. But they are there for you if you want them. And I think tomorrow I will give you all the directions for this kind of project ish thing we're going to start. So, but before we do that, we're going to go through these. And so we're looking at colonization and imperialism. And what those things are is we're going to look at, like, first off, what they are, second off, why they're so relevant, and the reasons behind it. What did Europe want out of these? Um, and so a lot of the colonies that we're going to talk about are in Africa and Southeast Asia. Um, and honestly, at this point, you should have three questions. What is a colony? Why did Europe want colonies so bad? And why did they focus their attention on Africa and Southeast Asia? And ultimately, it comes down to three things: money, religion, and natural resources. Those are the three things that really drove Europe to establish colonies. Is those three things here: money, religion, and natural resources. So first thing we need to look at is what is a colony. And a colony is just a where a foreign power takes over control of a distant place of land either by diplomatic or physical force with the purpose of gathering as much wealth and other resources for the colonizing country as possible. Usually, a country that created colonies were technologically and militarily ahead of the place it was colonizing. And for Europe, this happened after they went into what is known as the Industrial Revolution, which is a time of great scientific achievement. And they realized that they needed certain natural resources to make things work that they didn't have in Europe. And so they started looking outside their borders for these things. And eventually their attention focused and settled on Africa and Southeast Asia. Another thing we're going to look at is imperialism. And that is where you go into a place looking to establish your country's cultural traits, such as religion, language, and other traits, on a place or people without they're not willing participants, let's put it that way. You were forcing them to adopt your religion. You were forcing them to adopt your language. You were forcing them to adopt your customs. And so for Europeans, this meant Christianity being the official religion in their colonies and exploiting those countries economically. Um, an example of how they did this was a lot of times Europeans would use the native people to extract, pull out resources. They would then send those resources to the European country, where they were then produced, turned into something more valuable, and then they were sold back to the colonizing countries. At no point did the people working usually get paid, and their working conditions were usually pretty miserable. We'll talk about some of that here in a second, but essentially, the colonized country would pull out the resources. They would send them to Europe. Europe would turn them into something useful and then sell them back to the colonized country. And that was the only place the colonized country could buy things from. They could not buy things from other tribes in their region or from other European countries. And so the next question is, why Africa and Southeast Asia? Africa had natural resources that could not be found in Europe, but were in extremely high demand, such as gold, silver. Apparently, I have gold on here twice. Uranium, certain spices, slaves, rubber, oddly enough, and other rare earth minerals. Rubber is one we're going to come back to in a minute. But Southeast Asia, on the other hand, offered Europeans access to spices such as pepper, nutmeg, cinnamon, paprika, limes, chili peppers, and other spices that now you can just go to the store and buy these things. But at this point in time, those things were extremely rare commodities, and the only place you could get them was from Southeast Asia. Um, Southeast Asia also offered Europeans close access to trade markets in China, which were also extremely valuable to them. So not only did they get all the spices and other natural resources, they also got closer access to China and the market that China had. So native peoples did not respond too well to this, obviously, and the Europeans didn't care. Often these colonies were taken and ruled by force without the approval of the native peoples, who, before the Europeans showed up, had high functioning cities and even their own empires. Their only downside was they were just militarily and technologically behind Europe. And that is kind of what caused them problems. Often the native peoples were forced to work in farm fields, mineral mines, or other types of physical labor with no pay, and their working conditions were often terrible. So, this picture here is a tobacco plantation on the Indonesian island of Sumatra. And you can see kind of the conditions, what they're doing. This is a very physically demanding job, and oftentimes these people were not paid for their work, and they were often overseen by a few colonizers, typically white men from the European country that claimed this area. In this case, these are people from the Netherlands. The picture on your right, which is these guys, you'll notice this guy this kid right here, he's missing a hand. These kids are actually from what is today the country of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. At this point in time, this picture was taken, this area was under the rule of the Belgians and King Leopold II. And their big crop that they had was rubber. And they set rubber quotas, meaning you had to get so much rubber a day to meet your quota. Uh, Natural rubber is comes from certain trees, rubber trees in this part of Africa, which is like the central part of Africa. And so if you did not meet your rubber quota for the week, you had your hand cut off, among other punishment options. Um, and a lot of times the Belgians living in the Congo would brag to each other about how many hands they cut off that week. And so you can imagine how these people, the Congo people, hated the Belgians. Um, but this system continued. To give you some quotes here, the man on the left is Sukarno, who was the first modern president of Indonesia. And he said that I quote, I hate imperialism, I detest colonialism. I fear the consequences of their last bitter struggle for life. We are determined that our nation, Indonesia, and the world shall not be the plaything of one small corner of the world. So he is very much anti-colonialism, anti-imperialism, and then you have this gentleman here on the right who said, quote, I would say colonialism is a wonderful thing. It spread civilization to Africa. Before it, they had no written language, no wheel as we know it, no schools, no hospitals, not even formal clothing. And this terrible person was a man by the name of Ian Smith, who was actually the former prime minister of the British colony of Rhodesia, which is today the modern country of Zimbabwe in Africa. So you can see how Europeans looked at this at the time and how the native people of these areas also looked at it. These men were in their chart of their respective countries around the same time, the 1960s, 1970s. So it gives you an idea of the thoughts at the time. So how did they acquire these colonies? We kind of talked about started doing it by either military force or slowly establishing a colony economically. Typically, they would start by establishing a trading city on the coast of the place they were interested in. Examples would be Calcutta and Mumbai in India, and Hong Kong and Macau in China. Over time, these trading cities would start to expand, and the pressure would be on the native people to then offer better trade deals to the Europeans. And when they refused, the Europeans would then use that as an excuse to increase their presence militarily and then expand territory until they eventually controlled the whole region. Europeans felt very strongly that they were economically, socially, physically, and religiously superior to the people in the places they colonized. They, like you saw with Mr. Smith, they thought they were bringing civilization to these places. And honestly, they based this belief largely on on the physical appearances of the native peoples. They thought it was their duty as good Christian citizens and members of society to educate the people and remove the inferior native cultures. So how they did this is unique in both places. In Africa, outside of a few settlements on the coast, a lot of Africa actually had not been touched by Europeans up until the 1880s. In the 1880s, the German leader Otto von Bismarck called the European powers together because he feared that there would be a potential war between Europe over colonies in Africa. And so he called this meeting together and basically said, all right, we need to figure out who gets what. So they essentially divided Africa into sections. Section 1 goes to the British, Section 2 goes to the French, Section 3 goes to the Germans, Section 4 goes to the... Yeah. They essentially cut Africa into pieces and said, you get this piece, you get this piece, you get this piece, and we'll keep this piece for ourselves. The problem, well, one of the problems, there are several, is that they didn't bother to invite any Africans to this meeting. The people who were living in the place they were dividing up were not invited to the meeting. And so within about 20 years of this meeting, 20, 30 years, with the exception of Ethiopia, pretty much the entire African continent was colonized by Europeans. And here is kind of a visual to give you an idea of what this looked like. These are African kingdoms. And then this is Africa in 1914, right before the start of World War One. And you can kind of see how they divided the land into the different colonies. Southeast Asia was a little bit different. It was kind of over time, and it started with the British colonizing India and Burma and Myanmar. And then the French got Indochina, which is like Laos, Vietnam, Cambodia. The Dutch took Indonesia, and then the Spanish got the Philippines. These colonies were originally established to control trade routes between Europe and China up here. But they gradually grew profitable to the Europeans over time with crops such as tobacco, rubber, and other spices. Pretty much every country in this region outside of Thailand was colonized by European power at some point. So that is actually all the notes we are taking for today. I will hopefully have the project directions up for you tomorrow to work on or start working on. But if you all have any questions in the meantime, be sure to let me know. But other than that, I hope you all have a good rest of your Wednesday, and I will see you all tomorrow.